I loaded the last bag into the bed of Stevie's truck, breathing in the crisp September air that carried the first hints of autumn. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the light fog hanging between the trees surrounding my driveway. "That everything?" Stevie asked, checking the straps holding our gear in place. "Think so." I ran through our mental checklist one more time. Tent, sleeping bags, cooler, fishing gear, food. Stevie raised an eyebrow at me. "In the blue container," I confirmed, pointing to the sealed plastic bin. "And I packed extra coffee this time." "Thank God for that," Stevie said. "Last year I thought I was going to die from caffeine withdrawal." A blur of golden fur suddenly shot past me as Billy made a running leap into the truck bed, tail wagging furiously as he circled around our equipment, nose investigating every bag and container. "Someone's excited," I laughed, reaching over to scratch behind Billy's ears. He responded with an enthusiastic bark that echoed down the quiet suburban street. Stevie, I'd never been able to call him Steven since our college days, closed the tailgate with a solid thunk. "All set, Derek. Let's hit the road before traffic picks up." I climbed into the passenger seat while Stevie got behind the wheel. Billy settled down in the truck bed, head perched on the edge of a duffel bag, his eyes bright with excitement. This annual camping trip had become our tradition over the years, a way to reconnect and escape the daily grind. The 4-hour drive took us deeper into increasingly remote territory. The highways gradually gave way to state roads, then to winding forest routes where tall pines and maples crowded close to the pavement. We passed through small towns that became fewer and farther between, until finally we were surrounded by nothing but dense forest. "How's the teaching gig going?" Stevie asked as he navigated a particularly sharp curve, the truck's tires crunching on occasional patches of gravel. "Pretty good this semester. Got a group of juniors who actually seem interested in American history for once." I watched the endless trees flash by outside my window. "Though I've got this one kid who keeps trying to argue that the moon landing was faked." Stevie laughed. "Maybe you should show him those conspiracy theory documentaries and then tear them apart point by point. Not a bad idea, actually." The road narrowed further as we approached our destination, the pavement giving way to packed dirt. Stevie slowed the truck as we bounced along the uneven surface. Through gaps in the trees, I caught occasional glimpses of water reflecting sunlight. "Almost there," Stevie said, his face relaxing into a smile. "Man, I needed this trip." We pulled into a small clearing near the shore of Mirror Lake just after noon. The lake stretched out before us, its surface so still it perfectly reflected the surrounding forest and sky, living up to its name. The campsite was primitive, just a flat area for tents, a stone-ringed fire pit, and not much else. That was exactly why we loved it. Billy jumped from the truck bed the moment we stopped, racing toward the water's edge before circling back to investigate the perimeter of our campsite, nose to the ground. "Let's get the tent up first," Stevie suggested, already pulling our canvas tent from the truck. I nodded and helped him unload it. "Same spot as last year?" "Looks good to me. Ground's nice and flat there." We worked together with the practiced efficiency of people who'd done this many times before. I hammered in the stakes while Stevie assembled the poles. The canvas tent was heavier than the modern nylon alternatives, but it was sturdy and reliable, something Stevie insisted on after a particularly bad storm during our trip 3 years ago had nearly blown away our previous tent. Billy explored the surrounding area, occasionally disappearing into the underbrush only to reappear minutes later, his golden coat occasionally catching the sunlight filtering through the trees. "Keep an eye on him," I called to Stevie. "Remember last year when he found that porcupine?" "How could I forget? Cost me $200 at the vet to get those quills out." Stevie shook his head, smiling at the memory despite himself. By the time we finished setting up the tent, organizing our sleeping bags, and unpacking the essential supplies, the afternoon was waning. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across our campsite. The temperature dropped noticeably, reminding me why I'd packed my heavier jacket. Stevie knelt by the fire pit, arranging kindling and small logs in a careful structure. "Want to grab the matches from my pack?" he asked. I dug through his backpack and found the waterproof case containing matches and a lighter. As I handed it to him, I noticed him gazing out at the lake, a contented expression on his face. "Feels good to be back," he said quietly. "Yeah, it does." Darkness fell quickly in the forest. The fire crackled to life under Stevie's careful attention, casting a warm glow that pushed back against the growing shadows. I walked to the truck and retrieved the cooler, pulling out 2 beers. The bottles were cold against my fingers as I handed one to Stevie. "To another year," he said, raising his bottle. I clinked mine against it. "To another year." We settled into our camp chairs, the fire warming our faces as the night air cooled around us. Billy, finally exhausted from his explorations, flopped down near the fire, his eyes half closed in contentment. "So," I said, taking a sip of beer, "tell me about this promotion. You've been pretty quiet about it." Stevie's face lit up. "It's good, man. Really good. More responsibility, sure, but I'm finally getting to lead my own projects instead of just executing someone else's vision. That's awesome. You earned it. What about you? Still thinking about that department head position?" I sighed, staring into the flames. "I don't know. More administrative work means less teaching. Not sure that's what I want." "You're good with the kids, though. They respect you." "Most days," I laughed, "when they're not trying to convince me history is boring." We talked late into the night, catching up on the parts of our lives that somehow never made it into our weekly phone calls. The fire gradually died down to glowing embers as we shared stories about Stevie's new team at work and my challenging students. It felt good to reconnect like this, away from distractions. Eventually, we doused the remaining embers and crawled into the tent. Billy settled outside, curled up on his dog bed near the tent entrance. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag, the familiar sounds of the forest. Wind through trees, distant water lapping at the shore, occasional rustling in the underbrush, lulling me to sleep. I'm not sure how long I'd been asleep when I woke up. The inside of the tent was pitch black, and for a moment I was disoriented. Then I heard it again, the sound that must have woken me. Something between a scream and a shout, but distorted by distance and echoing strangely through the trees. I lay perfectly still, straining to listen. There it was again, a long, drawn-out sound that raised the hair on the back of my neck. It was too structured to be an animal, too distorted to be clearly human, but it carried a quality that made me instinctively uneasy. "Stevie," I whispered, reaching out to shake his shoulder. "Stevie, wake up." He stirred, mumbling something incoherent. "Listen," I whispered more urgently, shaking him harder. Stevie sat up, instantly alert in a way I'd always envied. "What is it?" "Listen, there's something out there. I heard sounds like someone shouting or... I don't know." We both fell silent. For nearly a minute, nothing happened. Then it came again, that same eerie call echoing through the forest. "What the hell is that?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Stevie cocked his head, listening intently. "Probably just an owl, maybe a loon on the lake." "That doesn't sound like any owl I've ever heard." "Could be a fox. They make weird sounds sometimes, almost like a person screaming." I wasn't convinced, but before I could argue, I noticed something else. A soft, whimpering sound coming from just outside our tent. I unzipped the tent flap a few inches and peered out. Billy stood there, his outline barely visible in the darkness. He was pressed against the tent, his body trembling visibly. When he saw me, he pushed his nose through the opening, trying to force his way inside. "Billy's scared," I told Stevie, pulling the zipper down further to let the dog in. Billy didn't need a second invitation. He scrambled into the tent, pressing himself against my sleeping bag, his whole body shaking. "Hey, it's okay, boy," I soothed, running my hand along his back. His fur felt cold and slightly damp from the night air. Stevie frowned, reaching out to pat Billy's head. "That's weird. He's not usually spooked by wildlife." "Exactly," I said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Something's got him really scared. It's probably just the unfamiliar sounds. He'll be fine." Stevie yawned, already settling back into his sleeping bag. "Let him stay in here if it makes you both feel better. You're not worried?" "About what? We're miles from anywhere. Probably just some animal sounds carrying weird over the water." He pulled his sleeping bag up around his shoulders. "Try to get some sleep. We've got fishing to do tomorrow." I nodded reluctantly and zipped the tent closed again. Billy remained pressed against me, his trembling gradually subsiding but never completely stopping. I stroked his fur, trying to comfort him while listening for more of those strange sounds. They came a few more times, always distant, always with that same quality that I couldn't quite identify. Despite Stevie's steady breathing beside me indicating he had fallen back asleep, I remained awake, alert to every noise in the forest around us. Billy stayed between us all night, occasionally raising his head at sounds I couldn't hear, his body tense and vigilant until the first gray light of dawn finally began to filter through the canvas. I tried to relax, but the sounds from last night kept replaying in my mind. The way Billy had trembled against me until dawn broke troubled me more than I wanted to admit. Morning light had eventually chased away the worst of my unease, but a lingering tension remained in my shoulders. "You're thinking too hard," Stevie called from the shoreline where he stood knee-deep in the lake, his fishing rod bent with the weight of another catch. "Just tired," I answered, shifting on the blanket I'd spread near the water's edge. The paperback in my hands had barely held my attention. I'd been on the same page for 20 minutes. Billy lay beside me, head on paws, eyes tracking Stevie's movements. Every few minutes he'd glance toward the trees behind us, ears perking up at sounds I couldn't hear. "That's 4, Stevie announced triumphantly, holding up another trout. "We're eating well tonight." I set my book down and scratched behind Billy's ears. "Come on, boy, let's play a bit." Billy's tail thumped against the blanket, but he seemed reluctant to move until I stood up. I grabbed a tennis ball from my backpack and tossed it along the shoreline. Billy finally sprang to life, bounding after it with renewed energy. For the next hour, I threw the ball while Stevie continued fishing. The simple rhythm of the game and Billy's obvious joy helped settle my nerves. When the dog finally flopped down, panting happily, I felt more like myself. Stevie waded out of the water, carrying his string of fish. "Want to hike up to Eagle Point? The view should be amazing with all the fall colors." "Sure," I said. "How long will it take?" "About an hour each way. We'll be back in plenty of time to cook these for dinner." He secured his catch in our cooler before grabbing his camera bag and rifle. "You bringing that?" I asked, nodding toward the gun. "Always do." Stevie checked the rifle's action with practiced movements. Better to have it and not need it. I filled our water bottles while Stevie packed a small bag with trail mix and first aid supplies. Billy watched us prepare, his tail wagging with anticipation. The trail to Eagle Point wound through dense forest before climbing steadily upward. Billy trotted ahead, occasionally circling back as if to check on us. The physical exertion felt good, clearing my head of lingering worries. "Hold up," Stevie said about 40 minutes into our hike. He stopped suddenly, head tilted. "What is it?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately, just stood perfectly still, listening. His eyes scanned the trees around us. "Thought I heard something," he finally said. "Probably nothing." I noticed how his hand rested on the rifle strap. "Animal." "Maybe." He shrugged and continued walking, but his pace was more measured now, his attention divided between the trail and our surroundings. We reached Eagle Point just before noon. The overlook offered a spectacular view of the valley below, a patchwork of crimson, orange, and gold stretching to the horizon. Mirror Lake gleamed in the distance, a perfect blue oval amid the autumn palette. Stevie pulled out his camera and began taking photos, moving around to capture different angles. I sat on a flat rock, enjoying the panorama while Billy explored nearby. "This is why we come back every year," I said, breathing in the crisp air. Stevie nodded without lowering his camera. "Worth the drive." As he photographed, I noticed how frequently he paused to look around, scanning the tree line behind us or studying the path we'd taken up. Twice he set down his camera to check his rifle, making small adjustments to the sling. "Everything okay?" I finally asked. "Yeah, why?" "You seem on edge." He shrugged. "Just being careful. These woods get pretty remote." After about 30 minutes at the overlook, Stevie suggested we head back. The return journey felt quicker, though I noticed Stevie maintained a brisker pace than usual. He walked slightly ahead, frequently turning to look over his shoulder or stopping to listen to sounds I couldn't detect. Back at camp, Stevie immediately set about preparing the fish while I organized our supplies. The day had warmed considerably, and I moved some items back into the truck to protect them from the afternoon sun. "We should pack up most of this tomorrow morning," I said, folding a tarp. "Make the departure easier on our last day." Stevie nodded, his attention focused on gutting the trout. "Makes sense." As the sun began to set, Stevie cooked the fish over our campfire. The smell made my stomach growl, reminding me how physical activity had sharpened my appetite. Billy sat expectantly nearby, knowing he'd get his share. "This is perfect," I said after the first bite. The trout was flaky and tender, seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and lemon. We ate in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance. After dinner, I washed our plates in a bucket of lake water while Stevie stoked the fire. When I returned, he had pulled out a deck of cards. "Poker?" he asked. "Sure, but I'm not betting against you again. You cleaned me out last year." He laughed. "Fine. Gin rummy it is." We played cards for a couple of hours, talking about work and mutual friends. The firelight cast long shadows across our campsite, and the normal sounds of the forest, rustling leaves, distant owl calls, created a peaceful backdrop. By 10, the temperature had dropped significantly, and we decided to turn in. "Early start tomorrow for our last day," Stevie said, banking the fire. I nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the previous sleepless night. "Sounds good." Billy followed us into the tent without hesitation. I changed into warmer clothes for sleeping and slipped into my bag. Beside me, Stevie did the same, placing his rifle within easy reach. "Night," he said, clicking off his flashlight. "Night," I replied, already feeling sleep tugging at me. I drifted off quickly, the physical exertion of the day overcoming my lingering concerns about the previous night's disturbances. The sound woke me suddenly. The same unsettling noise from the night before, but unmistakably closer. I blinked in the darkness, my watch showing just past midnight. Billy was already alert, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Stevie," I whispered, but he continued sleeping deeply. The sound came again, part scream, part moan, but distorted in a way that made my skin crawl. It seemed to come from just beyond our campsite. Billy's growl intensified. I sat up slowly, heart pounding in my chest. Something felt wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. The air in the tent seemed too heavy, too still. Moving carefully, I crawled toward the tent entrance and slowly unzipped it just enough to peer outside. The nearly full moon cast everything in pale silver light, making the clearing around our campsite visible. That's when I saw it. A tall figure standing motionless at the forest's edge, partially obscured by shadow. The person wore dark clothing that blended with the night, but their outline was unmistakable against the trees. They stood completely still, facing our tent directly, My breath caught as I realized they were staring right at me. I couldn't make out a face, just the dark silhouette, unnaturally still and focused. I scrambled back, my hands shaking as I grabbed Stevie's shoulder. "Stevie! Stevie, wake up!" I hissed, shaking him frantically. He came awake instantly, years of hunting trips having trained him to full alertness. "What? What is it?" "There's someone out there," I whispered, pointing toward the tent entrance, standing at the edge of the clearing watching us. Stevie's expression hardened. Without a word, he grabbed his rifle and moved toward the tent opening. Billy's growl had become continuous now, a warning vibration that filled our small space. Stevie unzipped the tent with one fluid motion and stepped halfway out, rifle at the ready. "Hey!" he called out, voice firm and commanding. "Who's there? Identify yourself." No response came. The figure remained perfectly still. "This is private camp," Stevie continued. "State your business or move on." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Even the normal forest sounds had stopped. No insects chirping, no leaves rustling. Just the sound of my own pulse in my ears and Billy's persistent growl. "Last warning," Stevie called. "Identify yourself now." When no response came, Stevie reached back into the tent and grabbed a flare gun from his pack. He loaded it quickly and fired upward. The flare burst overhead, bathing everything in harsh red light. In that crimson illumination, I caught a clearer glimpse of the figure, tall and thin, wearing what looked like dark clothing. But something about their proportions seemed off, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly how in the strange light. The moment the flare lit up the clearing, the figure turned abruptly and moved into the forest. There was something deeply unsettling about the way they moved. Too smooth, too quick, and most disturbing of all, completely silent. No crackling leaves, no snapping twigs, just a fluid retreat into darkness. "Did you see that?" I whispered as the flare's light began to fade. Stevie nodded, rifle still trained on the spot where the figure had stood. "Yeah, I saw it." I stayed inside the tent with Billy while Stevie prowled around our campsite, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Billy hadn't stopped growling since we spotted that figure at the edge of the trees. His body was tense against my leg, his eyes fixed on the tent opening where Stevie had disappeared. "It's okay, boy," I whispered, my hand on his back feeling the continuous rumble in his chest. I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince him or myself. Every few minutes I caught glimpses of Stevie's light sweeping across the trees. He moved methodically, checking each section of the perimeter, pausing occasionally to listen. The night had gone completely silent again. No crickets, no owls, nothing but the soft rustle of leaves in the slight breeze. Billy's ears perked up suddenly, and his growl deepened. I held my breath, straining to hear what had triggered him. A moment later, Stevie's footsteps approached the tent, and Billy relaxed slightly, recognizing the sound. The tent flap unzipped, and Stevie ducked inside. His face looked tired in the beam of my flashlight, but his movements were still precise as he set his rifle down within reach. "Nothing," he said, sitting heavily on his sleeping bag. "I checked the whole area twice. Whoever it was is gone now." "You're sure?" I asked. "I didn't find any footprints or signs anyone was there," Stevie said, running a hand through his hair. "The ground's pretty hard around here, though, so that doesn't mean much." "What do you think we should do?" I asked, already knowing what I wanted, to pack up and leave at first light. Stevie checked his watch. "It's already past 2. We should try to get some sleep." "And then?" "We stick to the plan," he said firmly. "We're here for 3 nights, and tomorrow's our last full day. The flare probably scared them off." "Them." I caught his word choice. "You think there were more?" Stevie shrugged. "Figure of speech. Whoever it was, they're gone. Probably just some weirdo trying to spook campers." I wanted to argue, to point out how the figure had moved when it left. Too smooth, too fast, too silent. But Stevie had already settled back into his sleeping bag, clearly considering the matter closed for now. "I'll keep the rifle ready," he added, noticing my expression, "and we'll both sleep light, but I'm not letting some random creep ruin our trip." Billy finally stopped growling and curled up tight against my side, though his eyes remained open, watching the tent entrance. I lay back down, but knew sleep wouldn't come easily. Every sound outside seemed amplified. The wind in the branches, the occasional splash from the lake, the creak of settling trees. Morning came too slowly. I must have dozed off eventually because I woke to gray light filtering through the canvas and Stevie already up and moving around outside. Billy was gone from my side, and I sat up quickly, momentary panic subsiding when I heard him barking once by the lake. I crawled out of the tent to find Stevie arranging our cooking gear. The morning air felt unusually cold, a heavy mist hanging over the lake. "Coffee's almost ready," Stevie said without looking up. I nodded, too tired for conversation. My eyes kept drifting to the tree line where we'd seen the figure standing. In daylight, it looked completely ordinary, just trees and underbrush, nothing sinister about it. After a quick breakfast, Stevie suggested fishing again, but I couldn't shake my unease. Every few minutes, I found myself scanning the forest edge, expecting to see someone watching us. Billy seemed to share my anxiety, staying unusually close instead of exploring as he normally would. "You're being paranoid," Stevie said after catching me looking over my shoulder for the 10th time. "We're fine." "Did you see how that person moved?" I asked, keeping my voice low despite us being alone. It wasn't normal. It was dark, we were scared, and the flare was dying out. Stevie reasoned. Our minds filled in the gaps. I didn't push it further. Stevie had always been the practical one, finding logical explanations for everything. Usually, I appreciated that quality, but today it felt like willful denial. We spent the day close to camp. I couldn't focus on anything. Not the book I'd brought, not the card game Stevie suggested, not even the spectacular view of the lake. Every sound from the forest made me jump. Billy was acting strange too, refusing to venture more than a few yards from me and constantly watching the trees with his ears perked. "See, even Billy knows something's wrong," I said when Stevie returned from gathering more firewood. "Dogs pick up on their owner's anxiety," he replied, dropping the wood near our fire pit. "You're freaking out, so he's freaking out." By mid-afternoon, we started packing most of our gear for an early departure the next morning. I worked quickly, eager to be ready to leave at first light. "We don't need to rush," Stevie said, watching me stuff my sleeping bag into its compression sack with more force than necessary. "We've got plenty of time." But I continued packing everything we wouldn't need for our final night, organizing it neatly in the truck. The activity helped channel my nervous energy, though my eyes kept drifting to the forest. While I secured our food in the bear-proof containers, hanging them from a tree branch away from our sleeping area, Stevie sat cross-legged outside the tent, methodically cleaning his rifle. He field-stripped it with practiced movements, wiping each part before reassembling it. "Checking your ammunition?" I asked, nodding toward the small box of cartridges beside him. "Just being thorough," he replied, not looking up from his work. Despite his casual tone, I noticed he'd counted out extra rounds, keeping them in his shirt pocket. Billy hadn't left my side all day. He followed me from tent to truck and back again, his body tense and alert. Occasionally, he would stop and stare at the tree line, the fur on his back rising slightly. "What do you see, boy?" I asked him once, following his gaze but seeing nothing unusual among the trees. As evening approached, Stevie cooked an early dinner, the last of our fresh food that wouldn't keep for the journey home. We ate mostly in silence, the tension between us palpable. I kept thinking about the figure from the night before, how it had stood so still, watching us. "We should put the fire out early tonight," I suggested as we finished eating. Stevie nodded. Good idea. Less visible that way. It was the first time he'd acknowledged, even indirectly, that he shared some of my concerns. We doused the campfire thoroughly before the sun had fully set, leaving us in the growing darkness with only our flashlights. "Early night, then?" Stevie asked, zipping up his jacket against the evening chill. "Yeah," I agreed, though I doubted I'd sleep much. We retreated to the tent while there was still a faint glow on the horizon. Billy squeezed in between us, still unusually vigilant. Stevie placed his rifle within easy reach and set his flashlight nearby. "Try to get some sleep," he said, turning off his light. "We've got a long drive tomorrow." I nodded in the darkness, not bothering to mention how unlikely sleep seemed. I lay on my back, staring at the canvas above me, listening to the night sounds begin around us. Stevie's breathing eventually slowed and deepened, but I remained wide awake. Every sound seemed amplified in the darkness. The wind rustling leaves, water lapping at the lakeshore, Billy shifting position beside me, and then something else. A twig snapping somewhere in the forest. Leaves rustling in a way that didn't match the wind's pattern. I held my breath, straining to hear. Another snap, closer this time. Billy's head lifted, his body going rigid against mine. I reached for my flashlight but didn't turn it on, not wanting to announce that I was awake. More rustling, definitely not the wind. It sounded like something, or someone, moving slowly through the underbrush just beyond our campsite. Billy's low growl returned, vibrating against my side. "Stevie," I whispered, reaching over to shake his shoulder. "Stevie, wake up." He stirred, instantly alert. "What is it?" "Listen," I breathed. We both went still. For several long seconds there was nothing but normal forest sounds. Then came another snap, followed by the distinct sound of something brushing against leaves. "Could be a deer," Stevie whispered, but his hand moved to the rifle beside him. "Billy doesn't growl at deer," I pointed out, my voice barely audible. We waited, listening to whatever was moving around the perimeter of our campsite. It seemed to circle us, never coming closer, but never moving away either, just pacing, watching, waiting. "Maybe we should use the flare again," I suggested after several minutes of this. Stevie shook his head. "Save it. If they come closer, we'll need it." He'd said it again. Even Stevie was thinking there might be more than one. The sounds continued for what felt like hours. Snapping twigs, rustling leaves, occasional pauses, then movement resuming in a different direction. Billy remained on high alert, his growl coming and going as the sounds moved around us. I checked my watch. Just past midnight. Still hours until dawn. The longest night of my life stretched ahead, filled with those sounds just beyond the reach of our flashlights, just out of sight in the darkness of the forest. I woke up with a gasp, heart pounding in my ears. Something had pulled me from sleep, not a sound but a feeling, like being watched. I blinked in the darkness of our tent, trying to orient myself. Billy was pressed against my side, his body rigid. Stevie's breathing came slow and steady from his sleeping bag. The night was unnaturally quiet. Then I saw them. Through the thin fabric of our tent, silhouettes stood out against the moonlight. Dark figures, perfectly still, positioned between the trees surrounding our campsite. Not animals, people. Or at least, things shaped like people. I rubbed my eyes, hoping they'd disappear. They didn't. I counted them, my breath catching as I tallied. 1, 2, 3. 6 distinct shapes that I could make out, all motionless, all facing our tent, watching us. "Stevie," I whispered, my voice barely audible even to myself. I reached out, shaking his shoulder. "Stevie, wake up." He stirred, mumbling something unintelligible. "There are people outside," I hissed, louder this time. "All around the campsite." Stevie came awake instantly. sitting up and reaching for his rifle in one fluid motion. He looked at me, then at the tent walls where the shadows were visible. "How many?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "At least 6 that I can see." Billy let out a low growl, his eyes fixed on the tent entrance. Stevie grabbed his flashlight, checked his rifle, and moved toward the tent flap. "Stay here," he ordered. Before I could object, Stevie unzipped the tent and stepped outside. I scrambled to the opening, peering out while staying mostly hidden behind the canvas. Stevie stood tall, rifle held ready but not yet aimed. The moonlight illuminated our campsite with an eerie silver glow, making the dark figures at the tree line stand out in stark contrast. "This is private property," Stevie called out, his voice carrying across the clearing. "Identify yourselves now." No response, not even a shift in posture from any of the watchers. "I'm armed," Stevie continued, raising his rifle slightly. "State your business or leave immediately." The silence that followed was absolute. I watched in horror as more shapes emerged from the darkness between the trees. They simply appeared, as if materializing from the shadows themselves. I counted again. 10, 12. More than a dozen silent figures now formed a complete circle around our campsite. "Stevie," I called, my voice shaking. "There are more of them." He nodded without looking back, his attention fixed on the watchers. I saw his hand move to his pocket, pulling out the flare gun we'd used the night before. In one quick motion, he loaded it and fired straight up. The bright red light burst overhead, bathing everything in a hellish glow. For the first time, I could see details of the figures. Tall, unnaturally thin, dressed in dark clothing, but their faces remained in shadow, even in the harsh light of the flare. What struck me most was their complete lack of reaction. They didn't flinch at the sudden light or the noise of the flare gun. They didn't shield their eyes or call out in surprise. They simply stood, watching, as if the flare meant nothing to them. As the red light continued to illuminate the scene, one of the figures at the front of the group began to move. It stepped forward from the tree line, walking with a gait that made my stomach turn. Its legs moved too smoothly, joints bending at odd angles, its upper body barely swaying with each step. It was like watching someone who had only read about walking try to imitate the motion. "That's close enough!" Stevie shouted, lowering his rifle to aim directly at the approaching figure. "Stop right there or I will shoot!" The figure kept coming, moving at the same steady pace. "Last warning," Stevie called, his finger moving to the trigger. "Stop now." The figure didn't pause or even acknowledge that Stevie had spoken. It just kept advancing with that terrible gliding walk. I glanced around frantically and realized with growing dread that the other figures had begun to move as well. From all directions they were closing in, stepping from the trees and walking toward our tent. Unlike normal movement through a forest, there was no sound, no crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs, no rustle of underbrush. Just silent, inexorable advance. "Stevie, they're all coming," I said, my voice breaking. "All of them." Stevie took a step back toward the tent, his rifle still trained on the nearest figure. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands as he kept the gun steady. The circle was tightening around us. The flare's light began to fade, plunging sections of the campsite back into moonlit shadow. I counted the distance between the nearest figures and our tent, 20 yards, maybe less, and they kept coming. Their movement unhurried, but unstoppable. I felt trapped, caught in a slowly closing net with nowhere to run. The lake was behind us, the forest, filled with more of them, for all I knew, in every other direction. Billy pressed against my legs, his growl continuous now, a rumble I could feel through my shins. The figures moved closer, their circle shrinking, their silence more threatening than any sound could have been. I watched them advance, my mind unable to process what my eyes were seeing. They moved like people, but wrong. They looked like people, but wrong, and they were almost upon us. I spun around at Billy's frantic barking from inside the tent. His barks came sharp and panicked, not his usual alert growl, but something more desperate. In the pale moonlight filtering through the canvas, I saw what had triggered his alarm. Another figure was somehow emerging from our sleeping bags, having entered the tent completely undetected. How had it gotten in? When? My mind raced as I tried to process the impossible sight before me. The figure unfolded itself from where our bags lay, rising up with that same unnatural smoothness I'd seen outside. It was tall and thin, its proportions wrong in ways I couldn't quite define in the dim light. The intruder lunged at me with startling speed. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that tore from my throat without conscious thought. I rolled away from its grasping hands, feeling the cold brush of fingertips against my arm as I barely escaped its reach. The sleeping bag tangled around my legs as I scrambled backward, my elbows digging into the tent floor. "Stevie!" I yelled, my voice breaking with panic. "Inside! They're inside!" Billy launched himself at the figure, his teeth bared in a snarl unlike anything I'd heard from him before. The golden retriever, usually so gentle, became a blur of fur and fury as he attacked the intruder. I heard Stevie rushing back toward the tent, his footsteps pounding against the hard ground, but the sounds changed abruptly. Multiple impacts, the shuffle of many feet, and then a grunt of surprise from Stevie. I caught glimpses through the tent opening of multiple figures converging on him simultaneously, their movements coordinated and silent. "Derek!" Stevie called out, his voice tight with effort. "Get out! Run!" His words cut off as I watched in horror through the tent flap as Stevie disappeared beneath a mass of dark shapes. His rifle clattered to the ground, the sound of metal on stone impossibly loud in the chaos. I heard Stevie's muffled shouts and the sounds of a violent struggle outside, fabric tearing, the impact of fists, and Stevie's increasingly desperate attempts to break free. Inside the tent, the figure continued pursuing me, its movements jerky yet purposeful as it navigated the confined space. I scrambled desperately toward the exit, my fingers clawing at the tent floor. Billy bit at the intruder's legs, his teeth catching on the dark fabric. The figure made no sound of pain, but its attention diverted momentarily to the dog, buying me precious seconds to escape. "Billy, come!" I gasped, reaching the tent opening. I burst from the tent on hands and knees, then stumbled to my feet. The scene outside was nightmarish. Stevie was being dragged into the forest by several figures, his body half lifted between them as he fought against their grip. His face was turned toward me, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes wide with terror. "Derek!" Stevie's voice called my name with increasing desperation, the sound already growing distant as they pulled him toward the tree line. "Help me, don't let them take—" His words dissolved into a grunt as one of the figures clamped a hand over his mouth. Stevie's eyes locked with mine for a moment across the moonlit clearing, silently pleading for help. In that frozen instant, I saw the realization in his gaze, the understanding that I was his only hope. Billy darted from the tent behind me, barking furiously as he charged toward the group, dragging Stevie away. More figures moved between us, their attention now turning toward me, cutting off any path I might take to reach my friend. Stevie's feet dragged across the ground, leaving twin furrows in the dirt as he was pulled inexorably into the darkness between the trees. Terror overwhelmed my rational mind as I grabbed Stevie's fallen rifle and ran blindly into the forest, abandoning my best friend to an unknown fate. The weapon felt cold and useless in my hands, my fingers barely able to grip it properly as I stumbled forward. I didn't even check if it was loaded. I just ran. Branches whipped across my face as I crashed through the underbrush, each impact stinging like tiny knives against my skin. The forest had transformed from our peaceful camping spot into a maze of shadows and obstacles. Moonlight filtered through the canopy in broken patches, creating just enough visibility to avoid running headfirst into tree trunks, but little else. My feet caught on exposed roots and stones I couldn't see in time, sending me stumbling but never quite falling. Fear kept me upright and moving. Behind me, Stevie's screams tore through the night. "Derek! Help me!" His voice bounced between the trees, disorienting and terrible. I wanted to turn around. I wanted to be brave. I wanted to be the friend he deserved. But my legs kept carrying me forward, away from those figures, away from what was happening to him. "Please. They're taking me somewhere. His voice cut off for a moment, then resumed with a raw, animal quality that made my skin crawl. I couldn't make out the words anymore, just the naked fear in his tone. The distance between us grew with every desperate stride I took. I crashed through a thicket, branches scratching my arms and tearing at my clothes. The t-shirt I'd slept in caught on something sharp and ripped across my back. I didn't slow down. I couldn't. The rifle banged against my leg as I ran, its weight throwing off my balance, but I clutched it tighter, the only tangible connection to Stevie I still had. The forest floor dipped suddenly, and I lost my footing, sliding down a small embankment covered in slick leaves. I landed hard on my side, the rifle clattering against stone. For a moment I lay there, my breath coming in painful gasps, listening. Stevie's voice had grown fainter, but I could still hear him calling out. The words were indistinct now, just sounds of human distress carried on the night air. Something else moved through the forest. Not just Stevie and whatever had him, but other things, spreading out through the trees, searching. I pushed myself up, grabbed the rifle, and started running again. The moon tracked overhead as I fled, marking the passage of hours, though time had lost all meaning. My lungs burned. My legs ached. Sweat soaked through what remained of my clothes, despite the cool night air. I ran until I couldn't remember why I was running, until the only thought in my head was forward, away, escape. At one point, I thought I heard Billy bark, a single sharp sound somewhere in the distance behind me. I froze, listening for more, but there was nothing. Just that one bark, then silence. Had they gotten him too? Or had he somehow escaped and was trying to find me? I waited, breath held, for another sound that never came. "Billy?" I whispered, too quietly for anything to hear. No response came. I started moving again, slower now, trying to listen for any sign of my dog while still putting distance between myself and the campsite. Stevie's voice had gone completely silent. I didn't know when exactly his screams had stopped. They had simply faded, growing more distant until they disappeared entirely into the night. Now the only sounds were my ragged breathing and the crunch of leaves and twigs beneath my feet. And something else. Movement. Not just mine. Something moving through the forest parallel to my path. I stopped behind a large tree trunk, pressing my back against the rough bark, and peered into the darkness. At first I saw nothing. Then, about 30 yards to my right, a dark figure moved between trees. It wasn't running. It was walking with that same unnatural smoothness I'd seen before. Even at this distance, and in the poor light, I could tell it wasn't human. Not really. The proportions were wrong. The movement too fluid, yet somehow jerky at the same time. I held my breath and stayed perfectly still. The figure paused, as if sensing my attention, then continued on its path, moving away from me. I waited until it disappeared from view before I started moving again, changing direction to head away from where I'd seen it. 10 minutes later, I spotted another one, this time to my left, moving through a patch of moonlight. I dropped to the ground behind a fallen log, clutching the rifle to my chest. The figure stopped, turned its head, too far, farther than a human neck should allow, and seemed to scan the forest. I pressed myself into the dirt and rotting wood, willing myself to disappear. After what felt like an eternity, it moved on. They were hunting me. spreading out through the forest, searching methodically, and they were between me and the way back to the campsite, back to the truck, back to any hope of helping Stevie. I pushed on, choosing my path to avoid open areas, staying in the densest parts of the forest where the moonlight couldn't penetrate. My initial blind panic had given way to a more focused fear, still overwhelming but channeled into each careful step, each decision about which way to turn. Hours passed. The moon began its descent toward the horizon. My legs trembled with exhaustion, muscles pushed far beyond their limits. I tripped over a root I didn't see in time and fell hard, the rifle flying from my hands and landing several feet away. When I tried to stand, my legs simply wouldn't respond. They'd given out completely. I crawled toward the rifle, dragging myself forward with my arms, fingers digging into soil and leaves. My body was shutting down, the adrenaline that had kept me going finally depleted. But I couldn't stop. Not here. Not when they might still be looking for me. I reached the rifle and used it to push myself up, leaning on it like a crutch. I managed 2 more stumbling steps before collapsing again. This time, I couldn't even crawl. I lay on my side, curled around the rifle, listening to the forest and waiting for them to find me. But the footsteps I heard weren't the silent, gliding movement of those figures. These made normal sounds, twigs snapping, leaves rustling. They were still distant, but growing closer. I tried again to move, managing only to drag myself a few more feet before my strength gave out entirely. The footsteps continued approaching. I closed my eyes, too exhausted to even feel fear anymore. Whatever was coming would find me, and I had nothing left to fight with. The light changed. First gray, then pink, then yellow-white as the sun crept above the trees. I kept moving, stumbling forward on legs that no longer felt connected to my body. Branches scraped my arms. Rocks dug into my feet through worn hiking boots. Still, I pushed on. Stevie's rifle clutched in my hands like it might save me if I just held tight enough. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw the dirt logging road cutting through the forest, my legs gave out completely. I collapsed at the edge of the road, my chest heaving. The rifle clattered beside me, useless as it had been all night. I tried to stand again, but my muscles refused to cooperate. So I lay there, watching the sun climb higher, casting long shadows across the packed dirt. Every sound made me flinch. A bird call sent my heart racing. The rustling of leaves had me grabbing for the rifle. Even the wind through the trees sounded like whispers, like those things were still out there, watching, waiting. I kept seeing Stevie's face as they dragged him away, his eyes locked on mine, begging for help I didn't give. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher. My mouth was dry, my stomach empty. I hadn't eaten since dinner the night before, hadn't had water since our last sips in the tent. The thought of the tent made my chest tighten. Billy had been there. Where was he now? Had they taken him too? The rumble of an engine cut through my thoughts. I pushed myself up on shaking arms, my heart hammering. The sound grew louder, and then a logging truck appeared around the bend, moving slowly on the uneven road. I waved my arms frantically, trying to stand but managing only to kneel. The truck slowed, then stopped about 20 feet away. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, stocky, with a thick mustache and a trucker cap. He approached cautiously, stopping a few feet away. "Hey, buddy, you okay?" he called, keeping his distance. I opened my mouth, but what came out was a jumble of words. They took him. In the woods. They didn't move right. They took Stevie. The man's expression shifted from concern to wariness. "You hurt? Been in an accident?" No accident." I grabbed Stevie's rifle, not thinking how it might look. The man took a quick step back. I released it immediately. "Sorry, my friend. They took my friend. Last night in the woods." "Who took your friend?" He stayed where he was, eyes flicking between me and the rifle. "I don't know what they were." My voice cracked. "They surrounded our camp. They got inside our tent. They dragged him away. The man studied me for a long moment. I'm Carl, he finally said. Carl Ramirez, you look like you've been through hell. How about I give you a lift to town? Get you some help? I nodded, relief washing over me. Thank you. Yes, please. Carl helped me to my feet and into his truck. I clutched Stevie's rifle, refusing to let it go even as Carl eyed it uneasily. He didn't push the issue, just started the engine and pulled back onto the road. What's your name? He asked after we'd been driving for a few minutes. Derek Ross. Well, Derek, there's a police station in the next town, about 20 minutes from here. We'll get you there, let the authorities sort this out. I nodded, leaning my head against the window. The trees blurred past, and I couldn't help scanning them, looking for tall, thin shapes moving unnaturally between the trunks. You said they took your friend, Carl said. Who's they? I closed my eyes. I don't know. They looked like people, but wrong. Too tall. Too thin. They moved. I shuddered, remembering the jerky yet fluid way they'd advanced on our camp. They didn't move like people. Carl was quiet for a moment. You been drinking? Taking anything? No. I opened my eyes to look at him. I know how it sounds, but I'm telling you what I saw. He nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. The same doubt I'd see in everyone's eyes over the coming days. The police station was a small brick building in the center of a town I'd never visited before. Carl parked out front and helped me inside, explaining to the officer at the desk that he'd found me on a logging road, disoriented and talking about someone being taken. Things moved quickly after that. I was given water, asked basic questions. When I mentioned Mirror Lake, the camping trip, Stevie being taken, the officers exchanged glances. One made a call. Within an hour, 2 detectives arrived, Caitlin Singh and Timothy Burns. They took me to a small room with a table and chairs. Detective Singh was in her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled back tightly and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. Detective Burns was older, with close-cropped black hair going gray at the temples and a serious expression that never wavered. Mr. Ross, Singh began, setting a recorder on the table between us. Can you tell us exactly what happened from the beginning? So I did. I told them about our annual camping trip, the strange sounds the first night, the figure watching our tent, the flare Stevie fired. I described how the figures surrounded us the second night, how one got inside our tent, how they took Stevie while I escaped with the rifle. And you ran all night? Burns asked, his tone flat. Yes, they were hunting me. I saw them moving through the trees, searching. But they didn't catch you, Singh noted, writing something in her notepad. No, I kept moving. I don't know why they didn't find me. And your dog, Billy? Singh asked. My throat tightened. I don't know. He was with me when Stevie was taken, but then I heard him bark once after I ran. Then nothing. So, to be clear, Burns said, leaning forward, you're saying multiple unknown assailants surrounded your campsite, abducted your friend Stevie Jensen, and possibly your dog as well? Yes, that's exactly what happened. Singh exchanged a look with Burns. Mr. Ross, we're going to organize search parties right away. Can you tell us exactly where your campsite was located? I gave them directions to Mirror Lake, described the specific site where we'd set up camp. They asked more questions, what Stevie was wearing, what equipment we had, whether we'd had any conflicts with other campers or hikers. No, I said. We didn't see anyone else the whole time. Just them. And can you describe them again? Singh asked, her pen poised over her notepad. Tall, unnaturally thin, dressed in dark clothing. I never saw their faces clearly. They moved. I struggled to find the words. Wrong. Like their joints bent in ways they shouldn't. Burns' expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Skepticism, hardening into disbelief. Mr. Ross, Singh said carefully, Had you and Mr. Jensen consumed any alcohol or other substances during your trip? Just beer, a couple each night with dinner. Any history of mental health issues, hallucinations, paranoia? I stared at her. You don't believe me. We're just gathering all the facts, Burns said. Standard procedure. But I could see it in their faces. They thought I was crazy, or lying, or both. The search began that afternoon. Teams of officers and volunteers combed the area around Mirror Lake. I waited at the police station answering more questions, going over my story again and again. They'd taken Stevie's rifle as evidence, bagging it carefully and logging it into their system. I called Stevie's parents. That was the hardest call I've ever made. How do you tell someone their son was taken by things that shouldn't exist? I stuck to the facts. We were camping. Stevie disappeared. Search parties were looking. I couldn't bring myself to tell them I'd run away while their son was dragged into the darkness. The search lasted 3 days. I stayed in a motel in town, checking in with the police station twice daily for updates. On the third day, Singh and Burns asked me to come in. We've completed our search of the area, Singh said, her voice professional but her eyes tired. We found your campsite. And? I leaned forward. Did you find any signs of Stevie? Or Billy? Burns shook his head. Mr. Ross, we found the campsite exactly as you described it. Tent set up, gear stored, cooler with food. But there were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no torn clothing, no drag marks. Nothing to indicate anyone was forcibly removed from the site. I stared at him. That's not possible. They took him. Right in front of me. We found 2 sets of footprints around the campsite, Singh continued. Both matching the hiking boots you and Mr. Jensen were wearing, according to your statement. We found no other footprints, no evidence of multiple people surrounding your tent. That doesn't make sense, I said, my voice rising. They were there. Dozens of them. Mr. Ross, Burns said, his tone softening slightly. Is it possible that what you experienced was not entirely real? Perhaps a hallucination triggered by stress, isolation, or something else? No. I slammed my hand on the table. I know what I saw. They took Stevie. He screamed for me to help him. Singh slid a folder across the table. These are photos from your campsite. As you can see, everything is intact. The tent isn't damaged. There are no signs of violence. I flipped through the photos, my hands shaking. The tent stood exactly where we'd placed it. The fire pit contained our last, doused fire. Stevie's camera bag sat near his sleeping bag inside the tent. Everything looked normal, untouched. This isn't right, I whispered. They were there. They took him. We've listed Mr. Jensen as a missing person, Singh said. The investigation will continue, but without evidence supporting your account of what happened. You think I did something to him? I looked up, horrified. You think I hurt Stevie? We're not accusing you of anything, Burns said quickly, but we need to consider all possibilities. The only possibility is what I told you, I insisted. Those things took Stevie. They tried to take me too. Singh closed her notebook. We'll keep looking, Mr. Ross, but I need to be honest with you. Your story doesn't align with the physical evidence we've found. Without some corroboration, it's going to be difficult to pursue the investigation in the direction you're suggesting. I left the station in a daze. They didn't believe me. The evidence didn't support what I'd seen with my own eyes. How was that possible? Had the things that took Stevie somehow erased all traces of their presence? Or was I really losing my mind? Days turned into weeks. The search for Stevie continued, but with decreasing resources and urgency. His parents hired private investigators who interviewed me repeatedly, their questions growing more pointed, more suspicious with each session. Why had I run instead of helping Stevie? Why couldn't I describe his attackers more clearly? Was there anything Stevie and I had argued about before his disappearance? I stopped answering my phone, stopped leaving my apartment. The story made the local news, then regional. Man disappears during camping trip. Friend reports mysterious abduction. The articles never outright called me a liar, but they didn't have to. The doubt was there between every line. Stevie's body was never found. No trace of Billy either. The case remained open but inactive, classified as a missing person investigation with no new leads. My credibility was shattered. Friends stopped calling. Stevie's family eventually stopped speaking to me altogether. I couldn't blame them. In their shoes, I wouldn't believe me either. But I knew what I saw. I knew what took Stevie, and I knew they were still out there, in the forest, watching, waiting for someone else to stumble into their territory. I returned home a different person. The Derek who had fled through the woods that night wasn't the same one who unlocked his apartment door 3 days later. I stepped inside, dropped my keys on the counter, and stood motionless in the middle of my living room. The silence felt wrong. Billy should have been there, nails clicking on the hardwood, tail thumping against the furniture as he circled me in greeting. But Billy was gone. Just like Stevie. The first few nights were the worst. I couldn't sleep for more than 20 minutes before jerking awake, convinced I heard twigs snapping outside my window. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, but logic didn't matter anymore. I kept the blinds closed tight and bought extra locks for my door. When I did sleep, I saw Stevie, always Stevie, being dragged backward into the trees, his eyes locked on mine, his voice calling my name. The dreams were so vivid I could smell the pine needles and feel the cool night air on my skin. Help me. Don't let them take... I'd wake up screaming, sheets soaked with sweat, my throat raw. Then I'd sit in the corner of my bedroom until dawn, back pressed against the wall, staring at the door. After 2 weeks of this, I made the call. "East Valley Mental Health, how can I direct your call?" a receptionist asked. "I need to see someone," I said. My voice sounded strange in my ears, hoarse from disuse. "A therapist for trauma." That's how I met Jacqueline Fry. She had an office downtown with soft lighting and plants in the corners. Plants I couldn't look at because they reminded me of the forest. During our first session, I sat rigid in the chair across from her desk, my hands gripping the armrests. "Tell me why you're here, Derek," she said. I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. "My friend was taken. While we were camping, I ran away." Jacqueline nodded, waiting for more. "The police don't believe me. They think I did something to him, or that I hallucinated the whole thing." "And what do you think happened?" she asked. I looked at her then, really looked at her. I know what happened. I saw it. But I can't make anyone believe me. That first session, I couldn't bring myself to describe the figures, how they moved wrong, how they surrounded our camp, how one had somehow gotten inside our tent without making a sound. I just told her about Stevie being dragged away while I stood frozen, then ran in the opposite direction. "I left him," I said, my voice breaking. "He called my name, and I just ran." For months, I went to Jacqueline's office twice a week. Sometimes we'd make progress. I'd managed to talk about pieces of that night. The sounds we'd heard the first evening, the figure watching our camp, Stevie firing the flare. Other days, I'd sit in silence for the entire hour, unable to form words around the horror. "You're experiencing severe post-traumatic stress," Jacqueline told me during our 4th month of sessions. "Your mind is trying to process something it wasn't prepared for." "But it really happened," I insisted. "I'm not making it up." "I'm not saying you are," she replied carefully. "I'm saying that trauma changes how we remember things. It fragments memories, makes them more intense in some ways and less clear in others." I knew what she was doing. She was trying to give me an out, a way to reconcile what I saw with what everyone else believed was possible, but I couldn't take it. Not when I could still hear Stevie's voice in my head every night. The guilt was the worst part. Not just that I'd run, but that in those final moments, Stevie had looked at me like I was his only hope. Like he believed, even as those things dragged him away, that I would somehow save him, that everything would be okay because we were friends, and friends don't abandon each other. But I had. I lost my job 6 months after the incident. I'd been back teaching for less than a month when it happened. We took the juniors on a field trip to Riverside Park, just a normal day studying local history. But as we walked along the path that bordered the woods, I froze. My vision tunneled, and suddenly I wasn't in the park anymore. I was back at Mirror Lake watching dark shapes emerge from between the trees. A student touched my arm asking if I was okay, and I screamed. Just screamed right there in front of 27 teenagers and 2 other teachers. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, clawing at the ground like I was trying to crawl away from something. The principal was understanding, but firm. I needed more time to recover. They'd hold my position for the rest of the school year, but I should focus on getting better. I didn't tell him I was never going to get better, that whatever had happened that night had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed. Have you considered that your guilt might be preventing you from healing? Jacqueline asked during one session. I stared at the floor. What do you mean? You blame yourself for not saving Stevie, for running away. But Derek, from what you've described, there were multiple attackers. You were outnumbered. What could you realistically have done? Something, I whispered. Anything would have been better than nothing. Would it? If you had stayed, we might be talking about 2 missing persons instead of 1. But her logical arguments couldn't touch the core of my guilt, because it wasn't just about what I did or didn't do that night. It was about the trust in Stevie's eyes, the absolute certainty I saw there that I would help him, that I wouldn't leave him, and I had betrayed that trust in the most fundamental way possible. I couldn't go into the woods anymore, not even parks with too many trees. I avoided nature documentaries, camping supply stores, even the nature section at the bookstore. Anything that reminded me of what I'd lost, not just Stevie and Billy, but my entire sense of safety in the world. Billy's disappearance was another wound that wouldn't heal. I'd heard him bark once after I fled, then nothing. The police never found any trace of him. No collar, no tags, no remains. It was like he'd never existed. Sometimes I wondered if they'd taken him too, or if they'd simply killed him for trying to protect us. Either way, I had failed him just as I had failed Stevie. At night, I'd find myself talking to Billy as if he were still there, curled up at the foot of my bed. "I'm sorry, buddy," I'd whisper into the darkness. "I'm so sorry I left you both." 1 year after the incident, exactly 1 year to the day, I received a package. It was waiting outside my apartment door when I came home from therapy. A small brown box with no return address, just my name and address printed in block letters. No postmark either, which meant someone had delivered it by hand. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. It was lightweight, maybe half a pound at most. I brought it inside, placed it on my kitchen counter, and just looked at it. Part of me didn't want to open it. Part of me already knew what I would find. Finally, I cut the tape with a knife and folded back the cardboard flaps. Inside, nestled in crumpled newspaper, was Stevie's camera, the same one he'd been using at Eagle Point the day before he was taken, the one the police said they found untouched in his sleeping bag. But this wasn't untouched. The casing was cracked, the lens shattered, like it had been stepped on or thrown against something hard. I picked it up with trembling hands, turning it over. The memory card slot was intact, and the small plastic card was still inside. My laptop was on the coffee table. I sat down, inserted the card into the reader, and waited while the computer recognized the device. A folder opened automatically, displaying a single file, 1 photo. I hesitated, cursor hovering over the icon. Did I want to see this? Did I want confirmation of what I already knew? But I had to know, had to see. I double-clicked. The image filled my screen. It was dark, blurry, obviously taken at night without proper settings, but I could make out our tent, illuminated faintly from within by Stevie's flashlight, and surrounding it, just as I had described to the police, to Stevie's parents, to Jacqueline. Tall, thin figures in dark clothing. They stood in a circle around our tent, their proportions wrong, their postures unnaturally still. I pressed my hand against my mouth, tears streaming down my face. Here it was, proof. What I had seen was real. What had happened to Stevie was real. The timestamp in the corner of the image showed 12:17 a.m., about 10 minutes before I had awakened to find one of them inside our tent. Stevie must have heard something, taken the photo quickly without leaving the tent. I stared at the image until my eyes burned, memorizing every detail. Then I saved a copy to my hard drive, emailed it to myself, and uploaded it to 3 different cloud storage accounts. No one was going to make this disappear. Tomorrow I would take it to the police, to Detective Singh and Detective Burns, to Stevie's parents. I would show them all that I hadn't been lying or hallucinating, that something had taken Stevie that night, something that shouldn't exist but did. But tonight I just sat with the truth I'd always known. The figures were real. They had taken Stevie. And somehow, a year later, they had returned his camera to me, which meant they knew exactly where I lived,